Presbyterian Church USA that has been asked to look at drug policy and its effects in our community, particularly the drug war and its ineffectiveness or whatever. And so we're gathering information and hearings throughout the country. We'll have 4 different hearings. We'll go down to the border, Colorado, we'll go back east for a group of hearings. And so we appreciate you coming this afternoon. We'll have about an hour to spend. I think each of you were asked maybe for 10 minutes or so. And if you have any written material that we can distribute electronically, we would like to have that with you with John. I think most of you know John in Poland, who is our consultant. And so you can interact among yourselves if you desire, or you can want to do individually. Barrett Lee, who is a member of our team, is going to help you. And after you've spoken about 8 minutes, he'll hold up a green napkin. And then at the end of 10 minutes, he'll kind of give you a black napkin and say, try to wrap it up so that we can hear from others and have questions from the team. And we again appreciate taking some of the afternoon to be with us. I think, Ken, you are first on our list, I think. I'm not sure that Ken and Raha and Laura.
We'll everyone first with presentations and then discussion.
And if you kind of begin just introducing yourselves and what organization you're from, perspective. Okay, thank you.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I really appreciate this invitation. My name is Ted Lewis. I work with the human rights organization Global Exchange based here in San Francisco, and I've done a lot of international work having to do with Mexico. This afternoon I'm going to focus a lot on Mexico as an emblematic case where the drug war has done tremendous damage, and also to look at what people in Mexico have been doing about that and what people in the region are asking us to do about it, what kind of actions have been taken, the kind of actions that are coming up that people can participate in. So that's where I want to focus my talk. I was asked this afternoon, and I just for further, I want to thank everybody who's putting this event together. I think that this is a really important move on the part of the Presbyterian Church, and I think that the impact of the church taking an interest, a serious interest in convening this kind of a forum is of tremendous importance, and will have impacts that we can't even imagine right now. I think it's already been very encouraging to the drug policy reform movement, which has tended to be a secular kind of movement that people of faith and people of other understandings of the world are getting involved in. It's very hard to do. So I was asked to address the question of the impact on the communities I work with of the drug war, changes I've observed in their response to the drug war, the opportunities of the United Nations General Assembly Special Session on Drugs, which is coming up in 2016. So I want to touch on that, and in particular, look at how folks can be involved in the lead up to the United Nations General Assembly Special Session, because I think it's an important moment of alignment that will allow us to line up a lot of the forces that are against the drug war that have not been able to show themselves publicly in that alignment. And I think this gives us a great opportunity to do it. It can be a big step forward. So that's where I'm going to try and go this afternoon. If I go off track and go beyond my 10 minutes, there's a couple things I want to make sure I say right up front that you remember. Again, is we're planning a caravan from Costa Rica to the United Nations General Assembly Special Session. That session, we now have dates. It was only recently decided it would be held between 19 and 21 April 2016. So the caravan from Central America will start probably the day after Easter, which is the 29th of March 2016. So put that on your mental calendar. People are, requested if not required to participate. So my own trajectory toward working in the areas of drug policy reform comes from my work in human rights. I didn't start out as a drug policy reformer. I'm not even sure if I'm there now, but I'm certainly, linked arm in arm with people who see this as a top priority and in working on it. My work in Mexico over the years, and I've worked professionally in Mexico for the last 20 years, has had to do with defending human rights, supporting human rights accompaniment on the ground in military-occupied communities. We did that throughout the 90s, in observing elections and pushing ahead the electoral democracy process, all things that don't seem immediately and directly related to the drug war, and nor should they be. But in Mexico, subtly and slowly, during the time that we felt that we were making some serious advances in pushing back the military from communities in Chiapas that had been under very close, continuous occupation, and opening up the electoral system so that people's votes actually counted for once. And I think it unfortunately they've only been once because they're not really being counted anymore in that same way. But there were big changes that were going on in Mexico, but at the same time there was a subtle shift in patterns of drug trafficking in our hemisphere that brought Mexico into a condition of crisis. And I can't go into all of that, but some of the important factors in Mexico were that after the big shift toward democracy in Mexico that took place in the year 2000, when the ruling party was for the first time in 7 years knocked out of power, that was the year 2000. A couple things happened in the month right after that sort of set the stage for what's happening now. One of which was that there was a huge defection from the military of a group of top-level Green Beret types of the Mexican military. Those people went to work for one of the drug cartels directly. It was a mass defection to one of the drug cartels. That's been heavily documented, but people usually forget about it. They took military training and all kinds of intelligence capacity right from the top of Mexico's military and put it into the hands of the Gulf cartel. War started, there was more conflict because of that, but the big event was also a big event for us, which was September 11th, 2001. After September 11th, the Caribbean was closed off by heavy surveillance, and drug trafficking changed. This is in big terms from being something that moved by air through the Caribbean to being something that moved more through Mexico. At the same time, for many reasons, Mexico's cartels became profit centers. They hadn't run the trade in the way that they had later. So these changes took place without a great deal of visibility in Mexico, and the drug war really only started to become visible kind of in a grotesque public fashion around 2005 or 2006 in the lead up to the 2006 elections. And this is where it gets tricky because it is, in our observation, the political use of the drug war, particularly in the case of Mexico, that has made it so violent, so terrible. It was there, it was a damaging factor all along, but when it came in as a political element, it got worse in a hurry. So in 2005, George Bush had worked with the Mexican president to initiate the Merit Plan. They were working to integrate Mexico more and more into the hemispheric security system, control everything. That was the plan. And there was an election campaign going on in Mexico. Felipe Calderon, I'm sure everybody's heard of because he was, putatively the president of Mexico for 6 years, ran a very dirty election, didn't really win, came finger close, clawed into office with the back of the United States, and immediately, as his first act in office, started the drug war. Went out, declared war on the drug cartels, said we got to get the situation under control, and that's when the violence in Mexico began to spiral out of control and become the crisis that Mexico is still living today. And it was precisely the political use of the drug war that caused that. Now, the groups that we work with in Mexico were not prepared for the kind of changes in the terrain, the kind of explosion of homicides, the human rights by military, by gangs. It was just something that people weren't prepared to handle. And for a couple of years, people were really left kind of flat-footed, not knowing how to interpret it, figure out what was going on, but eventually people started to speak up, and it came from the victims of the war. Oh my goodness, 8 minutes. Okay, so the victims of the war organized, and they really pushed back and started a movement. That movement started to become organized, and then there were kind of lightning bolts that hit a certain prominent people like the poet Javier Cecilia getting involved after his son was murdered and putting all this passions and energy and bringing together people who organized caravans, large caravans that went across Mexico, consoling people, letting people have a chance to get on a platform to talk about what was happening in their community. And eventually, those same folks who had organized those caravans in Mexico, amongst themselves, and with some pushing and discussion with people in the United States, recognized, you know what, we're never going to put an end to this violence if we don't figure out that it's not just violence, it's about the drug war, it's about this whole system that's been set up. We got to go to the United States and talk about it. And that's what was behind the caravan that came to the United States in 2012 and traveled across the country with 27 cities, covered 5,000 miles. A number of people who were in this room, participated in that caravan, helped to build that caravan. It was a very important kind of connection, particularly between African American communities in the United States, because one of the things that the Mexican folks were very sensitive to, and much more so than a lot of our compatriots, was that it's not just their suffering in Mexico, that people are suffering in the United States. And so they started to look into a lot of the facts. And I'm not going to go through all of it, but we know that kind of, and I'm sure they're going to be covered in this meeting. 5% of the world's 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prison population in the United States, 1.5 million arrests, or 1.5, half a million people behind bars every night. I don't want to go into those facts and bombard you with them. I will present those in the written material just so that they're there, but I know that that is around. And I'm blacking out there. I have to talk about the UNGAS a little bit just to explain what that is. The United Nations General Assembly Special Session on Drugs is something that was pushed by Latin American countries. There is a movement afoot in Latin America that has been led at the elite level, particularly by ex-presidents, to really question the drug war. It's very much in alignment with what the Presbyterian Church is doing. One of the big studies that came out of that was the scenarios for the drug policy in the Americas that the Organization of American States put together. They held large meetings to examine this. This is a document that doesn't reach conclusions but presents scenarios. I think it's something, if it hasn't been looked at and studied by the commission, it ought to be. And the same people who are pushing those efforts, pushing this new conversation, pushed open the door so that there will be this meeting at the United Nations in April. It's a General Assembly special session. People from the entire world, all countries will participate, all member states will participate in it. And in light of that, we want to organize something that can have an impact, that can show how the drug war is affecting people throughout the continent. So the caravan from Central America, that's the action. We want you and the Presbyterian Church to be involved. We actively appeal for your assistance on that, particularly with your congregations in Central America, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, all throughout eastern Mexico. That's where we're going. That's what we're about. And I wish I could talk about it more, but I've already really run over this. Thank you very much.
Maybe you can include as much as you want in your written materials of us, even if you didn't speak it.
Yes, I appreciate the offer. We'll see.
And the two magazines or studies that you held up, are those in English as well?
Actually, this is the English one and the Spanish one. That's what I held up. It's not two studies, it's one study. So they're both, and I can hand them to you. You can get all the information there right off the web very easily.
And the information you didn't get to share, is there some place on the web that we can go to?
The information I did, the facts, I will send them to John, and he can make sure that they get up.
And there we
I just ripped those off from Dan Corbello, who I don't know if he's showed up yet or not. But he's Dan Corbello from the Drug Policy Alliance, which is one of the fantastic groups that is leading the charge on all this. Gave me those numbers, and he's the one who keeps on top of how many people are being reported for drug offenses and all that. So I will send that out. moving too fast.
All right.
Questions of Ted?
Yeah, we wait until all have made presentations, or in light of the timing issues, my counsel would be that we have them all present their relatively brief initial presentations, and we know that will keep people here through the full piece. I'm afraid of that. If you have to go, you have to go, but I do think we should hear them all.
Well, could we ask if any of our presenters are under some strict time restraints? Sorry? Mr. Rooks? Okay, thank you. How long are you guys?
After 3 weeks.
We have until 3, so it's...
After the first, then he would be. Thank you.
I think we need to move it. I think we need to go back.
Okay, great. Wait, this is, you can't start timing it.
Okay.
The statement does not count in my 10 minutes.
Okay.
I want you to know, I normally go off the cuff and walk around and I had 10 minutes. I actually wrote this thing out. So forgive me because I'm gonna read you what I wrote more or less, but that will ensure that I can actually say it and not violate my 10-minute rule. So now you can type it. So I'm Dr. Jorjani, and I'm a prisoner's rights attorney. I want to spend a moment giving you an idea of my, really briefly, my work experiences so that you know where my perspectives are coming from and you can contextualize my comments within that. I've spent the last nearly 10 years representing individuals incarcerated and detained by the Department of Homeland Security and facing deportation from the United States. I began my career at the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project in the middle of the Arizona desert, representing immigrants detained in remote locations far away from their families, their loved ones, and any resources whatsoever aside from our office. I spent mornings, afternoons, and nights in Arizona's various detention centers and prisons and saw firsthand the impact of incarceration, displacement, and the psychological terror that takes place when the government threatens to take folks away from their children, from partners, spouses, from families, from community members, and to cage their human bodies behind bars. After Arizona, I spent 7 years as a clinical professor at the UC Davis School of Law, teaching law students to advocate on behalf of incarcerated individuals under immigration laws, primarily individuals who are convicted of criminal convictions and are therefore facing deportation on the basis of criminal convictions. My expertise became the intersection of immigration and criminal law. Last year, I left the university to create California's first ever immigration representation project out of a public defender office. That means that the Alameda County Office of the Public Defender, under the new leadership of Mr. Woods, essentially has hired a full-time immigration attorney to not only advise public defenders on the immigration consequences of criminal convictions, but also to take a limited number of cases to immigration court. So in other words, somebody comes to us, we represent them on their criminal case, and then a limited number of folks we can actually represent in their subsequent immigration matters, be it deportation proceedings or other proceedings. I want to make one thing crystal clear because I think this always gets lost in almost every discussion I've ever been a part of, and that is that the individuals that I am talking about are not just undocumented individuals. We detain and deport individuals who are legally in the United States all the time, every day. In fact, the majority of my clients have been lawful permanent residents from various countries around the world who become deportable on the basis of criminal convictions. So when I say non-citizens or immigrants, I'm talking about folks who are undocumented, folks who have asylum, folks who have refugee status, folks who entered the United States at the age of 2, have been lawfully permanent residents for the last 40 years, and yet are facing deportation on the basis of criminal convictions. To understand the impact of the war on drugs on immigrants, we really have to understand the relationship between the criminal justice system and the immigration has expanded significantly over the last 2 decades and has to be contextualized within a larger system of mass incarceration. We detain our non-citizen brothers and sisters not in a vacuum, but in the context of a prolific system of confinement and punishment, which I would argue we are almost just obsessed, really obsessed as a country, as a nation, with putting people behind bars. We, in fact, suffer an addiction from that. We incarcerate under immigration laws in a larger context of human rights crisis in which the United States, as was mentioned, has become the #1 incarcerator of the world. In this supposed land of the free, we imprison, as you all know, over 2.3 million people behind bars, what we call actual custody, and then place another approximately 5 million control their bodies under probation and parole and what is known as constructive custody. It was mentioned that the United States has 5% of the world's population, and yet 25% of the world's prisoners. And it has been our short-sighted and selfish desire to punish rather than to promote healthy communities in any meaningful way that has led us to this place. So as we fell deeper and deeper into the criminal justice nightmare, we began to detain in other areas, right? We began to look for other areas where we could punish and penalize folks. Immigration law began to take on a particularly punitive character in the late 80s, just after President Reagan signed into law the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which appropriated $1.7 billion to fight the so-called drug war. But it was really the laws that were actually signed by President Clinton in 1996. He made all kinds of mistakes in 1996. Among them were the laws that solidified and intensified the direct relationship between contact with the criminal justice system and deportation in a way that had never been done before. Said another way, when you come in contact with the criminal justice system and you are not a citizen, you are likely to then also come in contact with the immigration system, regardless of whether or not you have, if you believe in paying dues to society through incarceration, which I don't, but this idea of paying your dues. So these are people who, in that, if we take that to be something that has to happen, have paid their dues to society. They have been incarcerated, they have paid their restitution, they have paid their fees, their fines, they've gone through their classes, they've complied with all court orders. It's after that they then suffer this second layer of punishment. The reason that double jeopardy does not apply in this context is because immigration falls under civil laws, right? And you can't be punished twice under criminal laws, but a punishment under civil laws that we allow. It should be of significance to us to know that the spillover of the Get Tough on Crime movement onto the immigration landscape took place again in the late 80s and 90s, and this was the exact height of the drug war hysteria, and that is when the laws changed in a way that made it truly, truly devastating for non-citizens in the United States. So with the signing of the 1996 legislation, our criminal justice system began directly feeding our deportation system. Now we know that poor people and people of color are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system, in policing and arrests and prosecution, in sentencing, so on and so forth. Particularly, black folks and Latino folks are treated differently. Specifically, they are treated worse. People of color are more likely to be searched during traffic stops, more likely to experience the use of force during encounters with the police. I know you all know this, I'm going to say this anyway. Students of color face harsher punishments in school than their white counterparts. They're more likely to be referred to law enforcement by school officials, leading to a greater number of incarcerated youth. Youth of color are more likely to be charged as adults and for offenses. This is important because immigration laws allow for a little bit of leeway if you are charged under the juvenile delinquency system, but any juvenile that is charged as an adult will be treated as an adult for immigration purposes and in terms of immigration consequences. Once convicted, people of color receive longer sentences than white offenders, and that, again, how you are sentenced for drug crimes or for other crimes will impact the immigration consequences of those crimes. So we know, if that's who ends up in the criminal justice system, I just wanted to set that up for you, then you can see who ends up in the deportation system, right? It's the same folks that are targeted by one system that are targeted by the other. And over almost 10 years of doing this work, I've had a handful of clients facing deportation from European countries. Well over 95% have been poor immigrants of color. And so therefore, it's no surprise that the one area in immigration consequences that are most severe and unforgiving is where drug-related convictions are involved. So I want to give you 5 concrete examples of unforgiving immigration laws when it comes to drug-related convictions. The first example is that under current immigration laws, and these are not, what I describe here are not rare, this is the law in black and white. This is stuff that happens every single day. These are not the most egregious examples, right, that happen once in a while. The first example is that under current immigration laws, an undocumented individual who's convicted of a single nonviolent misdemeanor drug possession offense is permanently barred from ever applying for a green card through that person's family member. So if that person is married to a U.S. citizen, has been married to a U.S. citizen for years and years and years, and has one misdemeanor possession of a controlled substance, of meth, of cocaine, of heroin, that person can never get a green card. Example 2, an individual who's been a lawful permanent resident of the United States for, let's say, 5 decades, has lived here essentially since the age of 5, has even been a veteran, or is a veteran, has fought for this country, has taken an oath to protect this country, and 40 years later, nonviolent misdemeanor possession offense is also deportable from the United States on the basis of that single conviction. You only need one, the timing doesn't matter, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony doesn't matter, the sentence doesn't matter, just the fact that you were convicted of a drug crime makes you deportable from the United States. The third example is that the definition of drug trafficking in immigration is so broad that an individual involved in or even running a drug cartel is, again, not an exaggeration, it's plain black and white. I'd be happy to cite the statutes if you have time or would like that in writing. But that individual, again, who is involved in or even running a drug cartel is treated and classified under the same definition of drug trafficker as a person who sells a small amount of cocaine to another person outside. Immigration law does not nuance trafficking. Trafficking means the exchange of drugs for money. That is all it means for immigration laws, and those people are treated identically. A drug trafficking conviction is an aggravated felony under immigration law and therefore carries the harshest consequences. It's a permanent bar from ever returning to the United States, a bar from any and all forms of relief, almost all forms of relief, including things like asylum. I'm going to do my last 2 examples, speaking super fast. Are you okay with 1 more minute?
Right.
Okay. Example number 4 is there's a ground of inadmissibility under immigration law that does not even require a conviction for drug trafficking. It's called the reason to believe drug trafficking ground. It requires that DHS have a reason to believe that you are a drug trafficker. The last client that I had that was charged under that ground went from Mexico to the United States, lawful permanent resident, has a green card in his wallet. When he came to take it out, they found that a gram of cocaine wrapped up in a piece of paper dropped from his wallet as he was taking his green card out. That was trafficking because you had a substance and you were taking it from one country to another. Final example is that while expungements and often even vacators do not eliminate statutory immigration consequences of criminal convictions, immigration consequences of a conviction that has received a full and unconditional presidential pardon or a gubernatorial pardon can be eliminated. Now, you all know that getting a presidential pardon or a governor's pardon is almost impossible. However, even if you get one, it doesn't waive the drug-related grounds. So even if you are that lucky man or woman who gets a presidential pardon for a drug-related offense, the immigration consequences of that offense are still going to go through because they've made an exception for drugs. Finally, I want to just let you know that under immigration law, we have something called mandatory detention. That means detention without bail. If you scour the criminal laws of the United States, the federal laws, or the state laws, you will not find anything that is remotely like what we have in immigration law in terms of mandatory detention. There are some instances where you've been charged with a significant offense, like a capital offense. Sometimes then you can be held even if you do not present a danger or a flight risk. But in all other circumstances, people will at least get a bail hearing and at least be heard on whether or not their continued detention is necessary, except in immigration law where, again, one misdemeanor, nonviolent possession of controlled substance offense makes you subject to mandatory detention. I can go on, but I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Very good. Ms. Thomas.
Thank you very much. My name is Laura Thomas. I'm the Deputy State Director for California for the Drug Policy Alliance. I'm going to talk a little bit about what DPA is, and then I'm going to focus on the public health implications of the war on drugs and how it's affected our health and well-being. First of all, thank you to the Presbyterian Church for convening this task force. I know you have a long history of taking stands on important social issues, and so I appreciate that you are tackling this one as well, and I want to thank Deb Small in particular for inviting me. So I work for the Drug Policy Alliance. We are a national nonprofit advocacy group fighting the war on drugs. Our mission is to advance policies and attitudes that best reduce the harms of both drug use and drug prohibition, and promoting the sovereignty of individuals over their minds and bodies. So we focus both on how to mitigate harms due to actual drug use and how to mitigate the harms that are created by drug prohibition itself. My background is in public health, and particularly in HIV and AIDS. I got to start as an AIDS activist, worked in various forms of public health for a while, and I've been at DPA for about 7 years. And so I was asked how the war on drugs has affected the communities with which I work. And in terms of public health, it's been pretty devastating. So the HIV epidemic itself was certainly not created by the war on drugs, but it was made substantially worse by the war on drugs. The number of people who became infected with HIV is significantly higher because of drug prohibition. The number of people who died of HIV is significantly higher. And we have been prevented from using some of the most effective evidence-based interventions against HIV because, again, of drug laws. Specifically, and in addition, one of the reasons that we have such significant racial disparities in the HIV epidemic, and one of the reasons why the African American community has been hit so much harder by HIV is also because of drug law enforcement and the ways that it has been prosecuted. A similar impact has been felt in the hepatitis C epidemic. Hep C, at this point, there are more people who've been affected with hepatitis C in this country than HIV. It's sort of this iceberg epidemic. The vast majority of people with Hep C don't yet know that they have it. They haven't been tested. But as people learn their status and become aware of that, it's going to be an even more significant public health crisis in many ways. Deaths from drug overdoses, drug overdose deaths are now the leading cause of accidental death. More people die of drug overdoses than motor vehicle accidents. That's true here in California, that's here true across the nation. Skin infections, abscesses, endocarditis, these are things that will affect individuals' health and well-being and also create significant costs to our healthcare systems and our public health systems. One of the biggest challenges is really the untreated, or the lack of treatment, the lack of access to quality treatment for substance use dependence. And that's really one of the most significant harms of the war on drugs. There's no other medical condition in which we would tolerate the kind of treatment, the kind of wait lists, the kind of hoops that people need to jump through in order to access treatment for a medical condition. Substance use dependence is recognized by all major medical organizations as a health issue, as a medical issue. There's a medical diagnosis for it, and yet we will make people wait for months, 6 months. We will tell people you have to get, detox yourself before you can enter treatment. You would never tell, a diabetic you're going to have to get your blood sugar under control first before we will put you on insulin. That would be medical malpractice, and yet that is exactly what we tell the people who are opiate dependent. You need to get all the opiates out of your system before we will put you on methadone. So I can talk at great length about that particular topic, but it's really significant the way that criminalization and stigmatization of people who use drugs and people who are dependent on drugs is used as a barrier to accessing services that they need. Mass incarceration obviously is one of the results of the war on drugs, and it is also in and of itself creates additional public health harms. In terms of extensive research looking at communities that are impacted by mass incarceration, increased levels of stress, of mental health issues, of additional substance use disorders in communities that are traumatized by mass incarceration and by people having parents in correctional systems when they're growing up, leads to a whole array of additional problems. the health impact of mass incarceration. Lack of access to treatment, that certainly includes medical cannabis, medical marijuana, which is not available to many people entirely because of drug prohibition, lack of access to pain meds and restrictions on pain meds. And really the stigma that people who use drugs experience. All of these things are exacerbated by poverty, by homelessness, by institutional racism, and are often experienced together. So what changes have I observed over the years in terms of the response of the public health community in particular to this? Fortunately, that's going in the right direction. Absolutely, I will say the public health community is stepping forward to address these. We've seen a number of really good reports. The American Public Health Association, with a push from the Drug Policy Alliance, adopted a really far-reaching statement 2 years ago identifying the need to decriminalize drugs as a public health issue. The International AIDS Society in 2010 created the Vienna Declaration calling to end the criminalization of people who use drugs in order to end the HIV epidemic. The International Red Cross, the Global Commission on Drug Policy, and the Affordable Care Act in and of itself, or particularly in conjunction with the Wellstone-Parity Act, has done a lot of work to create better access to substance use treatment for people. Unfortunately, it's not available for folks who live in states where Medicaid expansion is not available. But in states like California, it is doing a lot to ensure access to methadone, morphine, to other treatment programs. The harm reduction community has been at the forefront from the very beginning. Drug user organizing, again, people most affected by the war on drugs have always, from the very beginning, been a part of organizing to undo it, organizing to reduce the harms. So syringe access programs, peer-delivered overdose prevention programs, supervised injection facilities have been a part of the harm reduction response to this. And so, this is one of the places where we've seen a number of churches and faith communities around the country making space for syringe access programs in church basements and things like that. But, I do have to emphasize here the cost of a slow learning curve. We've known for many, many years that syringe access programs work, but we still are not able to use federal dollars for them. If we were able to use federal dollars, we could be saving a lot more money. The same level of evidence exists for things like supervised injection facilities and heroin-assisted treatment. The reason we're not able to do that is because of legal barriers, stigma, fear, and we need to get over all of those barriers and start providing them because in the meantime, it's that slow learning curve that's keeping us from being able to better address it. So what policies and communities efforts have worked well? So some of those supervised injection facilities, drug consumption rooms, where people who inject drugs are able to go into a safe clinical space where they're able to access sterile supplies, use drugs with usually a nurse or clinician on hand who can help address their technique, referrals to services. There's one legal supervised injection facility in North America in Vancouver, British Columbia. They found that it has reduced HIV and hepatitis rates, substantially reduced overdose rates, reduced the extent to which syringes are improperly disposed of in the community, and that people who go to Insight are more likely to enter detox, more likely to enter treatment, and more likely to stop using drugs. So if what you're looking for is a way to help people transition out of problematic substance use, supervised injection facilities are a very effective way to do that. Heroin-assisted treatment, certainly addressing stigma, and the bottom line really is decriminalization of drug use. We have a very good model in Portugal. Portugal's approach has seen really significant health benefits as well as the individual and human rights benefits. So we need to end the criminalization, the marginalization, the social exclusion of people who use drugs. And I'm particularly happy to see the church stepping forward on this because I think that our faith leaders in particular particular have a lot to say about the impact of social exclusion and what social inclusion looks like and what it can mean to really recognize the humanity of people who inject drugs and ensure that people understand that they are a part of our social fabric. So, thank you. I also have a whole stack of materials that I'm happy to distribute.
Dr. Coady.
Thank you. My name is Davida Coady. I'm a medical doctor at Columbia University. And this is
The microphone.
Is it on now? Okay. My name is Davida Coady. I'm a graduate of Columbia University Medical School and Harvard School of Public Health. I specialize in pediatrics and have a 30-year career in international health, working in a total of 33 third world countries. I wanted to spend the latter part of my career in my home, which is Berkeley. I changed specialties into addiction medicine because I felt that that was the biggest public health need in my community, and I still feel that. So that was 18 years ago. I established a drug court in Berkeley with the judges, and then because there was no treatment available, it was immediate and free, we started Options Recovery Services, and I'm still 18 years later the medical director of Options in Berkeley. The takeaways that I would like to give you from this are as follows. Addiction is a chronic disease, it's a medical condition for which there is good evidence-based treatment, and treatment does work. Secondly, treatment generally doesn't happen without an intervention of some sort, and we'll get back to that in a few minutes. Thirdly, most drug-dependent people do not in this country get treatment. Fourth, between 85 and 95% of the inmates in our jails and prisons in California have a substance use disorder, usually related to their crime, not always. And lastly, very few of these inmates currently get treatment, and to me, this is the real crime. The scope of the problem in the U.S. is that 23 million people who are substance dependent, and this does not count nicotine. This means that they're unable to stop on their own. They're very likely to stop using drugs without treatment. Drug dependence is the major cause of homelessness, of violence, and other crime, of destroyed families, and abuse and neglect of children. And that specifically was why I changed into this specialty. Besides this 23 million, there are another 40 million persons for whom drugs and alcohol is very harmful, even though they're not dependent on them. These are the binge drinkers, drunk drivers, people with medical problems exacerbated by drug or alcohol use. And for this group, they often stop using on their own, sometimes because their doctors tell them to, and others because they get into AA or NA or some other support group, and they generally don't need a treatment program. But for the 23 million who are dependent on their drug, they're very likely to get off their drugs without treatment. And of that 23 million, only 2.3 million get treatment. The others, many of them die of their disease, and because it is a chronic disease, it does not go away. And the reason that they don't get treatment is the treatment is not readily available to people without money, without resources. But also because the disease of drug dependence is interesting in that 95% of the people who do get treatment whether it be in a 12-step program or in a treatment facility. 95% of them do not wake up one morning and say, I want treatment. They get into treatment because of an intervention. And this is certainly the first step in treatment. Where do the interventions happen? For middle-class people, a family intervenes, a job intervenes, they get a DUI, and sometimes the medical profession intervenes, mental health providers occasionally, and sometimes the social services. Way too seldom the homeless organizations, in my experience anyway, send people to treatment. They're more interested in meeting the wants than the needs of people who are homeless because of their addiction. So for poor people, intervention is almost always with the criminal justice system. The drug courts have been hugely successful. The problem with the drug courts is that there aren't enough of them. Way too few. It's a struggle. There are judges who run them, struggle for funds. And secondly, the judges don't have good treatment to send people to. Treatment to be effective after intervention has to be immediate and it has to be good. In Oakland, we are fortunate that we have not only a drug court, but a county drug court for CPS cases, a reentry court for parolees and probationers, a revocation court for parolees, a veterans court, mental health court, and a homeless court. And in the program of outreach recovery services, we get referrals from all of those courts. We're talking about treatment outside of jail or prison. There's just way too little available. The program that I started and still look at is that is willing to get clean and sober, and we take them immediately, and when they relapse, we take them over and over again. It's an outpatient program, separate groups for men and women, separate groups for those with serious mental illness. We have our own mental health clinic, and we have 160 beds of clean and sober, tobacco-free housing. We have intensive case management, and we have our own toxicology lab for rapid results of drug testing so that we can get people immediately into detox when they relapse and then back into treatment. We have a lot of extras like physical health screening and education, domestic violence, classes, anger management, smoking cessation, acupuncture, yoga, other exercise, and criminal and addictive thinking classes, particularly for those coming out of prison. We also help people with the little things that keep them out of treatment, such as getting birth certificates and getting IDs and getting disabled bus passes and that sort of thing. We work closely with law enforcement. Many of the policemen in Berkeley will bring people to the program and say, this is where you need to be, and at least they get them in the door. They may not stay, they probably won't stay, but they don't know where to come back when they decide to. We also get lots and lots of walk-ins they're brought in by graduates of the program who bring in their family and friends. This is probably our major referral source. We're an abstinence-based program. We're not harm reduction. We believe that there is a place for harm reduction, but it's not for our population, which are not going to be successful in their recovery unless they become abstinent. It's a year-long program with aftercare as long as they want, clean and sober housing as long as they want. We've got some people in our housing now for up to 15 years. I'll skip to actually this word. Programs in the jails or prison. I think that everyone in jail or in prison should have the benefit of a substance abuse program. I think there's no reason not to do that. It certainly would save money. And very, very few people get it in the jails. I'd like to tell you about one program that we do in prisons. We started 8 years ago with Kentucky prison and now working for California prisons, where we train lifers to be state certified alcohol and drug counselors. And this has had an amazing state prison. The violation rate was cut in half after the first 2 years of the program there. And I believe that because it's just a very different feel walking into the prison and across the yard now. Quite a few of these people have gotten out. The 50 men that we trained at Solano, all but 9 are out now and working in programs around the state. 8 of them working in options, as a matter of fact. And they're wonderful counselors. I think perhaps you might like them to come and talk to you. It's a program that has worked, but it is a fight to keep this going. You know, there are few people in the Department of Corrections that really support it and have helped us. But the bureaucracy has given us very, very little support. So treatment works, takes an intervention, has to be available, it makes economic sense. Like all medical care, it's a human right, I believe, and it keeps people out of incarceration. Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate all 4 of you, your comments, and opened up some of my thoughts. Are there questions or responses any of you would like to make to each other before we ask the task force? And anybody here have questions on the task force or?
This is not exactly the question, but I didn't get a chance to get to sort of, what are some things that we can do. And so, in 10 seconds, I'll just say that you've heard the president talk about, you've heard the president roll out some forms of executive action. All of the problems that I described are things that would require legislative change. And we know that comprehensive immigration reform has been around for the last how many years, and it's on the table. I would say that comprehensive immigration reform cannot happen without taking into consideration the needs and the rights and the well-being of individuals who commit particular crimes, even though many immigrants' rights activists would be quick to concede those rights in exchange for essentially breadcrumbs, right? In exchange for some legalization of some individuals who we identify as innocent. But I would submit to you that this dynamic of the innocent immigrant versus the guilty immigrant, the ones we want, the ones we don't want, the good, the bad, on and on, has actually only hurt us, and that is entirely problematic, but also has not gotten us to anywhere that we need to be. So a true vision of justice and a true vision for comprehensive immigration reform has to include the folks that have been criminally convicted. And while I focused on and kept saying nonviolent misdemeanor drug offenses, I actually believe that it's not the nonviolent part that we should be paying attention to, that all people who have suffered criminal convictions still deserve inherent human rights, right? And so that justice, that vision of justice has to include all of those people.
Thank you. Yes.
Doctor, you're describing that you said 95% of those folks who get treatment requires an intervention. But one of the criticisms of the drug court is that it's coercive. It's a threat of prosecution. Can you speak to the need or the element of intervention or an outside force to get people in treatment?
The people coming into our program over the years, those with the nudge from the judge, do better than those who come voluntarily without justice supervision. And I think this is because treatment's hard. First of all, most people come into our program not wanting to be there. They're their families said, you're here or you're out, or they're much more likely the criminal justice system has sent them as an alternative to incarceration. And that works. Most of the people who come in within a matter of a day, more within a week or two, decide that they really want to be there. They get inspired. There's a lot of motivational interviewing, a lot of denial, the first 2 weeks of denial management, and a lot of them kind of get a breakthrough and turn around. And yeah, it's coercion to get them in the door, and but then they generally decide they want to be there. And many times people who have failed program, going back to jail or prison, have come directly to us when they get out. One man very recently, after 7 years in prison, he was on the doorstep, said, "Do you remember me? And now I'm ready. I just wouldn't do it before. Now I'm ready." Does that answer your question?
Just larger population-based studies show that in reality, the vast majority of people who develop problematic substance use actually find their way out of it without ever accessing a formal treatment program. And so data that comes from treatment programs is often seeing a specific subset of folks who've had problematic substance use at one point or another. And the research, the academic peer-reviewed research also actually shows that coerced treatment does not produce better outcomes than coerced treatment. Certainly from from a drug policy line perspective, we're certainly advocating for decriminalizing drugs, but we're also advocating for a creation of better options to enter treatment that don't require going through the criminal justice system. And I think we've built up a system where, for example, we want to put people through drug courts, but then there's no treatment available. What would happen if we actually created that treatment in the community prior to creating drug courts? So we didn't, there are a lot of people who often say, I tried to access treatment, I wanted to access treatment, I wasn't able to get it, then I got arrested and they gave me this opportunity and I took it. So I think it's important to look at the large scale research on what actually happens around how people develop problematic substance use, what makes them vulnerable to that, and how we best help them get out of it. So that's, the people who are able to find their way out because of treatment programs, that is fantastic, and we want them to have those successes, but that's not true for everyone.
Deborah?
So my question is to Dr. Coady. You said, and actually that question came too long, but I'm going to start with Dr. Coady. You said that people who are coerced into treatment through the threat of punishment do better than people who aren't. And if that's true, and given the racialized nature of coerced treatment in this country, that would suggest that more white people should be coerced into getting treatment under threat of punishment so that they can have better outcomes. So is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is the information from SAMHSA is that 95% of people who get into treatment are there because a family coerced them in, or the job, or and I think this applies to the world. We have a very, very mixed group and options.
No, but I'm saying in general, you weren't just talking about your program. You were talking about coerced with the threat of the criminal justice system versus family or employment-based coercion. The majority of people who go into treatment are coerced at some level, by people around them or by threat of punishment. But what I heard you say was that you thought the threat of punishment generated, of criminal punishment, generated better outcomes than the other forms of coercion that lead people into treatment. Is that that's what that's okay? So we know from the statistics that while blacks and whites use drugs at equal levels, that the majority of the people who are coerced with the threat of imprisonment are people of color. Now, it follows that if you're saying that that produces better outcomes in terms of treatment, then we should be doing that more to white people. But I don't think you're saying that. And so I'm asking really seriously, like, where do you come out with that in terms of viewing it from the level of racial bias? Because there's a huge differential between who is being forced into treatment with the threat of imprisonment and who's not. And it has nothing to do with who's actually abusing drugs or a problematic drug user.
Maybe I just can go by the people who come into our treatment court, and I think you're correct. There's a larger percentage of them are people of color, and I haven't counted, but that's my impression. And I haven't seen data on that in other places. But I do know that nationally, programs find that people who are under criminal justice supervision are more likely to stay in the program.
Well, I'll talk. I mean, there's actually different data about that, but I don't want to debate that right now. I was just really asking about the
Now, we need to probably say thank you to these four.
I actually have a question for Laura.
Well, if you can do it briefly.
I was. So you brought up decriminalization as being the principal option, and I just wondered where does that leave people who are charged with selling drugs who are not using drugs? And since the majority of people in prison for drugs are there for drug selling, not using, how does decriminalization deal with that problem?
Decriminalization does not adequately deal with that problem, and you're absolutely correct, Deborah. We need to address drug sales and people who are charged with drug sales as well. They really are able to eliminate the impact of drug prohibition on all of our communities, particularly communities of color. One thing that happens frequently is that prosecutors charge people with possession for sales based on no actual evidence of any intent for sales. And that's one of the concerns that we have as we move towards drug decriminalization, that prosecutors will just charge people with possession for sales instead. So if we do not, as a movement, move appropriately to address drug sales and people